She said, my name is Danielle, and so if y'all have any questions, just stop me. So I have a lovely paper here to introduce Dr. Chambers. So he is a Weaver Brothers Distinguished Professor of Forestry, and he has a couple of degrees. One in, obviously he got his bachelor's and master's at the same place in Southern Illinois, and he got his PhD from the University of Missouri in ecophysiology. Did I say that right?
Correct.
Got it. Okay, and then he's been employed at LSU since 1976, and he has served as the Forestry program leader before for 5 years. And back in 2001, he was promoted to the Weaver Brothers Professor of Forestry. His major areas of research include focusing the effect of environmental and silvicultural practices on regeneration and forest productivity. And then it says here that he also does stress physiology and dendrochronology. Current research concentrates on characterizing coastal forest site conditions along gradients in flooding and salinity, and the identification of regeneration condition classes for coastal forests. I'm an ag business major, so I hope this makes sense to some of y'all R&R or forestry majors, so you'll have to do the job of talking about forestry, because I sure don't know anything else on this paper. But anyway, here's Dr. Chambers.
Danielle, you did the best job of reading that anyone has ever read. You pronounced every word correctly. That's true. I'm going to make this very informal. It's supposed to be a debate, but since I don't have a partner, and he's been out of town for the last week, almost a week now, we didn't have time to discuss this together. So I didn't know what his answers were going to be to the debate questions, and I didn't really know what mine were going to be because it depends on what the other debater says. But since we're not going to have a debate, all the answers are correct. Right? And I'll spend some time, you're videotaping? Uh-oh. Do I have to write a paper about this?
No.
Long story short, we have some students who come in at 4:30 because they haven't figured out a way to be two places at once yet.
I understand.
So we're really only videoing for them.
Okay, that's great.
But I can be bribed to not post it on YouTube.
No, that's fine. Whatever you want to do is fine. What I want to do instead then, since we're not going to debate today, is I want to ask you a few questions. This is my prop. This is the kind of things that I looked up on Wikipedia before I came in. Okay. So I'm holding it because I don't want to forget it. But I have the major words right here on the front. So and what we were supposed to talk about, Danielle, was
Forestry.
Forestry
Wildlife.
and wildlife. That's correct. And forestry and wildlife was, how are we going to manage? Are we going to manage for the wildlife? Or are we going to manage for the forest? Okay. And we were going to talk about industrial forestry. Okay. Large corporations that own, or at least once, at one time, owned lots of land across the United States, and how they managed primarily in plantations, although there are exceptions to that. Certainly in the South, a lot of the industrial ownerships manage trees in plantations versus natural forests, okay, trees that don't necessarily grow in rows, okay. And we were going to talk about other kinds of forests, okay, those that might be owned by non-industrial private owners. That would be people like me, might own a few acres of forest land, or people like some of you, or your parents perhaps, or your grandparents, that might own 200 or 5,000 acres, or 20 acres, or 10 acres of land someplace, and you may or may not manage that land. Some folks in the state do, and some don't. So talk a little bit about that. Talk about who owns the land. Okay, and then what are some of the controversies between managing lands for timber productivity and managing lands for wildlife. Okay, so those are some of the things that I'll try to cover today without notes for you. Okay. First thing I want to do is ask the big question from you. So y'all are going to get a choice in this. You're like the public in the United States here, okay? And this is going to be a political speech today. Some kind of debates are always political in some way, right? So, and how many of you have been listening to debates so far on the Republican primaries? Okay, so you know a little bit about debates. That means I can avoid any question that you ask, right? I don't necessarily have to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, right? Okay, so that's a good start for us. So I'm in pretty good shape. And when we get done, regardless of how well I've done, I can tell you that I'm going to win. Okay? So my first question for you is, should we manage the forest for timber, okay, or should we manage the forest for wildlife? Should we manage the forest as a forest, or should we manage it as a wildlife habitat? Okay. So, maybe I will use this. Is there a...
I have some.
Okay. I don't need it. You can just keep track of it on a piece of paper.
You want?
I want to know how many of you favor managing the forest? Raise your hand. So you got to vote one way or the other here. So how many of you managing the forest? Okay, we have 1, 2, 3. Hold your hands real high. 4, 5. I get 5. Okay.
It's one or the other.
That's okay. Don't worry about it.
Not both.
Danielle, come right over here.
One or the other.
And it's manage the forest or manage wildlife habitat?
Manage forest or manage wildlife? Okay. Now, how many of you are going to manage wildlife? Okay. Looks like the majority are going to manage wildlife. Okay. Now, how do you manage wildlife? Say it again.
By managing the forest.
By managing the forest, believe it or not. Okay. The only exception to that, today we're talking about forests and wildlife. So if you're in the marsh, okay, we're not including you today. Okay, you have to be in the forest. There are wildlife that don't use forests, right? But today it's forest wildlife. So in order to, and every wildlife professor that we have in the School of Renewable Natural Resources will tell you, in order to manage the wildlife that live in a forest, you must manage the forest. I don't think any of them would disagree with that, okay? Other than those that might say, we never need to manage a forest. We just let it grow. Okay? Long before we were here, there were forests. Okay? And now that we are here, there's probably less forest. Okay? So we haven't always done a good job. Part of that, though, is the fact that we're here. All right? About a third of all forests that were in the United States before settlement in the 1600s, let's say, are no longer here. Can anybody tell me why? Yes. Say it real loud for me.
People in the 1800s no longer used timber to build the forts that they lived in.
Okay. People needed forest resources for the places they live, the places they work, okay, for protection, okay, etc. What else? That's probably the number 2 reason. Maybe. Depends. What else? Why would we eliminate forests? Fuel, to some extent. What else? Yes?
To make room for development.
Make room for development, more so today than before, certainly. Okay, well, let's jump ahead a little bit here. Let's pick this out. This course is 2,900. What precedes the 2,900? Agriculture. Agriculture is the number 1 reason that we eliminated the majority of that forest. Okay? we cleared forest to be able to produce food for those that moved to the United States. The number one reason. That's changing today. There's another reason today that's becoming more and more important. But the major reason that we lost most of that land between the 1600s and today was because we cleared that land for agricultural production. Okay? And forests are a big part of agriculture. Okay. Now, what do you think the number one reason is today that we remove forest? And somebody mentioned this. I think you mentioned it.
Development.
Development. Okay. Where does everyone that used to live downtown New Orleans, downtown Baton Rouge, etc., want to live? Excuse me? The suburbs, okay. And what used to be in the suburbs? Forest. Well, there used to be forest here. A lot of it's gone because we're here, right? So now we want to live in the forest. We have to go to where the forest is, and we remove the trees so we can live in the, used to be the forest. All right. In fact, in Louisiana, we have kind of a different scenario because a lot of the land in Louisiana and a few other states for certain was taken out of production of forest for the purpose of getting rid of swamps, okay? Creating cities, because disease was associated with swamps and things we didn't like alligators and mosquitoes and so on, had to be a bad thing. So we got rid of a lot of our wetlands in the United States for two reasons. One, they were swamps and they were wet, useless areas. So we might as well get rid of them and make them productive in something else. And the second reason was for agriculture, for clearing. That was the more important one. At one time, when we cleared most of the land in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley from southern Illinois to South Louisiana. Got rid of all the hardwoods and small land that existed there, except for a few remaining tracts, for that reason. Okay. Now, what happened to the wildlife that was in all those forests?
Can we answer that question?
You all thought that the foresters were the bad guys eliminating forest, right? So far it's us, you know, desiring to have something to eat, something to build our houses out of and things like that, that really eliminated most of the forests that have been eliminated so far, and that eliminated the wildlife that existed in those forests. How many of you thought of that before? I'm impressed. I learned something. Okay. Now, so, we know to manage wildlife, we have to manage forest. I'm sorry. I'm used to talking in front of them. So I get close and far away and want to dance around.
We'll let Nick edit it.
That's good. That's good. So, we know we need to manage forests to manage wildlife. Okay, how are we going to go about that? What do we do first? You have a dog?
Yeah,
A cat?
no,
Just a dog. Okay, what do you do for your dog?
eat it,
Feed it? Okay, so we got to feed them, right?
yeah,
So what do they eat,
all food.
right? What do the wildlife in the forest eat?
What'd you say?
What do the wildlife in the forest eat? What do the animals in the forest eat?
Plants.
Plants?
Each other.
Each other? Okay. So we have to have plants and each other.
Yeah.
All right. Now, some of them eat plants. Not too many of them chew down trees, but there are a few, right?
Yeah.
You can think of at least one, right?
Woodpecker.
Woodpeckers? Okay. Not the one I was thinking of, but yes, they certainly do their job of eating, okay? What else? How about beavers? They chew down trees, right? Okay. So, but, okay, what other forest insects do we have that eat plants? They're in agriculture, right? Agriculture, they grow plants and animals, plants. And do they have insects in agriculture? And do they eat plants? And what kind of plants do they eat? Just about everything you plant, right? Okay. Do all insects eat all plants? No. So, if all insects don't eat all plants, and insects are animals, okay, so we can kind of use those as a surrogate to the other wildlife that's in the forest, right? So we can assume then that all animals don't eat the same plants, all right? So what do we need then? This is real basic stuff, right? We just haven't thought of this. You know, you don't sit there every day just thinking about, okay, what occurs next, right? So we need a diversity of plants in the forest. Now, so the more diverse the forest, the more wildlife diversity we have. Okay, and that's pretty true. Not always, but pretty true. All right, so one thing we do to manage forest for wildlife is we manage for diversity. Is a loblolly, how many of you know what a loblolly pine looks like? Okay, at least one. Smartest girl in my class. Okay, smartest person in my class.
Better.
Better. I guess I have to go to that.
You have to go to the
Yeah, I
tunnel
have to go to
question.
that too, okay. So, loblolly pine, you see pines all over campus. Most of them are not loblolly pine, but a lot of them are. The second, well, I don't know which one's the most common, I never counted them. We have spruce pine, loblolly pine, and spruce pine, loblolly pine, and slash pine, okay, are the three most common on campus. We do have a few shortleaf, and we used to have a couple more. We have a couple longleaf on campus. Most of them are slash, loblolly, and spruce pine. So loblolly pine is by far the most important pine tree for timber production in the southeast United States. Okay, so you should know loblolly pine. All right. And loblolly pine is most commonly planted in plantations for timber by the timber industry. Okay. So if we're growing only loblolly pines in a forest, wait a minute, can we do that? Well, let's back up a little bit. What's a forest? Anybody? Place with lots of trees. That's a pretty good start. Okay, that's a pretty good start. Is it a forest if we have only trees? It's not. You got to have something else, right? Because a forest is a type of ecosystem. Okay, so you have to have more than trees. You have to have animals and insects and other types of plants there. So you automatically, if it's a forest, even if it's a plantation, there's some diversity there. Okay. Now generally you have much less diversity in a single species plantation like loblolly pine planted in rows than you have in a natural forest situation. Not always, but much of the time that's true. Okay. Now when you're driving down the road, how many of you drive? Okay, when you're driving down the road and you're passing land that looks like forest land, okay, is it pretty easy to see into the forest? No. Why not?
It's so grown up.
So grown up. Okay, there's all kinds of, at least along the edges, okay, there's all kinds of other plants, and vines and shrubs and herbaceous plants and so on. Volunteer trees, all of those that birds that sit along the edge and like the edge of the forest. You didn't know birds planted trees, but they do, okay? They plant them along the edge, okay? As well as out in the middle. They plant a lot of them along the edges. So from the edge of the forest, it often looks like a jungle, so to speak, okay? In fact, That's kind of what a jungle is, except it's in the tropics. It's a forest with a bunch of edges, and the edges are all filled up with plants, and that's what makes it so-called jungle rather than a tropical forest.
It's
Yes.
not a stupid question, but what's the difference between forest and woods? Just like where I come from.
Forest and woods.
Like, I call it the woods. Like, if I go hunting, I don't go hunting in the forest, I go hunting in the woods.
Okay, how big's your woods?
Depends on where I go.
Okay, give me a couple of ideas.
Um,
You can do it in acres, square feet, square
my
millimeters.
place in Mississippi is about 400 acres.
400 acres, that's your woods? Is it?
I mean, I call it a hunting lease, I don't call it the woods, but,
Oh, now it's a hunting lease, okay.
well,
I'm
like,
picking
the
on you.
woods are behind my house. The hunting lease is where I hunt. Like, I don't hunt in my woods.
Okay, and how big is your woods behind your house?
About 3 or 4 acres, I guess.
Okay. Usually, but not always, some people use those terms interchangeably, so it's not magic, okay? But usually woods, or a wood lot, as some people call them, are a small acreage of forest, okay, that you use, either behind your house or on your property someplace, or somebody you know, or whatever, as opposed to a forest, okay? And when most people think of forest, they think of lots of trees in a large area, okay? But forests don't really have to be large areas, they can be relatively small areas, okay? So there's no strict definition as to how many acres you have to be a forest versus a woods, but that's kind of the idea. All right, so we'll say for our purposes, it's not much different, it's just size. Okay. All right. Now, where was I going with all this? So far, we got that plantations. How much time do I have, by the way?
About 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes. Okay, and I got to get through all that. Okay, I can do that. So plantations have less species diversity normally than natural stands. What would be an exception to that? Natural stands that are composed of a single species. And there are such things. Okay. Usually they result from a disaster of some kind, and all the trees start at once, and there's some species that grows faster than everything else, so it all comes up as one species everywhere. Okay, like an aspen stand after a big major fire or something might come in, and it'll be a single species stand, very low in diversity. And diversity then will begin to occur over time in that instance, as it occurs in forest plantations. The longer it is before you enter a plantation, if you just left it alone, the more diversity would tend to increase, okay, in a plantation situation. If you were in a very diverse natural stand, over time, it tends to decrease. Okay, so it's going to meet in the middle somewhere. The thing is that we never abandon all these places for permanent, in a permanent situation. So there's always some kind of disturbance happening. And every time you have a disturbance, you have new species entering the system, the stand, the forest. Okay, and so that increases diversity when that occurs. Okay. So foresters use disturbance to manage forest, okay, and to control what's there. Well, to control what's there and control, you can either use it to control diversity, or you can use it to eliminate diversity. You can eliminate competition. If you want to grow straight, tall loblolly pines, they're never straight, but tall loblolly pine trees at their maximum rate, then you want to eliminate most of the other things that are in there, not everything, but most of the other things that are in there, okay, because they compete for soil and for water and nutrients and so on with the trees that are there. So you would tend to eliminate those. Okay. If you want to maximize diversity in a older stand of trees that has not been disturbed for a long time, and you walk into that forest, not on the edge, because the edge is always kind of filled with stuff, but if you walk in 15 or 20 feet, all of a sudden it looks pretty stark in there. There's lots of trees, okay, and a few shrubs maybe, but the rest of it is pretty devoid of life. In fact, the deer don't like those stands because there's nothing in there for them to eat. There's no real browse. Okay. So disturbance in that case is what produces the browse. What you need is the green, the chlorophyll, photosynthesis, the plants that can do that. Okay? And you need them where the animals can get to them. Now, some animals use the upper part of the forest, some use the mid part of the forest, and some use the forest floor. So you have to put the vegetation, whatever kind it is, young trees or young shrubs, or herbaceous or grass or whatever it's going to be, where that particular type of wildlife is going to exist. And the way you do that is disturbing the forest. You make disturbances. And when you make disturbances, the forest floor gets light, and when it gets light, the seeds can germinate. Not only can they germinate, they can probably germinate without the light. They just can't survive and grow without the light, for the most part. And so when you give them more light, they grow more. So those disturbances lead to more plants, wider diversity, more wildlife. The more structure you get within the stand, the more mid-canopy you get, and so on, in various layers. The more wildlife you have that use different types of vegetation in different situations in terms of nesting, in terms of eating, and so on, the more wildlife that you have. Okay. So, if we protect a stand in perpetuity, never let anyone touch it. Never let any kind of disturbance occur. Will we have lots of wildlife? Everybody thinks we'll have lots of wildlife. Raise your hand. Okay, most of you are correct. Okay. Disturbance produces more diversity. More diversity produces more wildlife. Okay. Is plantation forestry good or bad? 4 more minutes. Cheating.
What do you mean by plantation?
Trees in a row. Single species, well, most often. Single species. What was my question?
Is it good or bad?
Huh? Is that
Is it
bad?
good or bad?
I think it has pros and cons.
Yeah, like everything.
Okay.
It would have pros and cons.
If you want to grow trees very fast and you want to grow one species,
It's good for
great way
production,
to do it.
but
okay.
it's not.
If you want to manage wildlife that depend on one species or a very limited number of species growing at a very fast rate, that's a good way to manage because you'll get them. And if you disturb those stands every so often so that you eliminate some trees so that the trees that remain grow faster and faster and faster, okay, every time you disturb, you increase the diversity on the forest floor, so you're going to increase the number of wildlife that are going to use that kind of forest during that time. So you can increase wildlife in a forest situation like that for a limited number of species. But always, almost always, the maximum number of species comes when you have disturbance and the greatest diversity in plants of all sizes, shapes, and species within a forest. Okay? So there are, like you said, there are positives and negatives. Some species are favored by that, some species are not. Now, I did not talk about all the things that we would have talked about in a debate, our planned debate. We probably wouldn't have gotten to them all anyway. But did you learn something about forestry today?